Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Um, Not quite as. Oh, I thought I had a glitch there for a second. I think we're live. Um, this is going to be not quite as religious as some of them, but I've had several friends. Hopefully, you didn't miss the intro. Um, in case you did, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. This is Karey Carbaugh, and this is the Karey Carbaugh Podcast. My name is Karey Carbaugh, and that's why I've named it the Karey Carbaugh Podcast. Sorry if that was a repeat. My system froze there for a second, and I wasn't sure how much of that came through. But as I was starting to say, before I was so rudely interrupted by my system, technical difficulties, uh, tonight's podcast is going to be a little bit different than some of them, a little less religious, although there will be some religious undertones, I think. But I've had several people that have asked me to share a bit about my experience at Carnegie Hall, which was about a week ago. I got back home a week ago yesterday. We performed at Carnegie on Sunday, March 13th. No, March 16th. Sorry, we left here and flew out to New York on March 13th and performed on March 16th. But I've had several people ask me to share a little bit about that experience, and I thought, how can I tie that into the podcast? And then it hit me yesterday. I love how God works, and I'm going to share something hopefully later on if we have time that was shared with me just before this podcast. I love how God gives me ideas sometimes at the very last minute, but it occurred to me yesterday that this is really an opportunity that, as I've tried to share through many of these podcasts, creating self-image, building self-esteem, my experiences as a person with low vision, all of this kind of ties together, and I think I can share some aspects of all of that through this experience. Because truly, this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, although many people have more than one opportunity to experience Carnegie. I just wanted to take you through a bit of the experience and how that, yes, how it impacted me, but also some things that came up around my disability that actually proved to be a strength. And so I thought I would tie all this together like that and share some of this as I've been asked to do. So if you'll bear with me, hopefully this story will be impactful. If you'd let me know if you're watching this live with an L or a live in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay, drop me an R or a replay in the comments. And let me know as I'm going through the story if you're finding value in this, if this is impactful in any way, or if it's relatable in any way. So I'll go through some of the nuts and bolts of the Carnegie experience. We, of course, flew into New York. Many of the people that I was with, a couple very close friends, had never been to New York before. So this was their first experience in a big city. As some of you know that have been friends for a while and following me on Facebook, I lived in New York State, not New York City, but about an hour outside of New York City in my early adulthood, right out of college. It's been a number of years ago, but I had been to New York City, and so the big city experience for me was nothing terribly overwhelming. I'm always a little bit overwhelmed when I go to the big city, but not like some of my friends who had never been there before. And so I was able to share some of that experience with them to help them figure out how to navigate the city. Midtown Manhattan is actually fairly easy to navigate because all the avenues are numbered and all the streets are numbered, with a few exceptions. Broadway kind of cuts the city in sort of a diagonal, kind of an S or a Z shape. And then there's a few avenues like Park Avenue and Madison Avenue that are thrown in between the numbers, but for the most part, it's laid out in a very numeric fashion. And so navigating your way around the city is fairly simple. Many of my friends were trying to use GPS and their phones were getting confused because of some of the streets that don't run true. Now, when you get outside of Midtown Manhattan, it doesn't hold as true what I'm about to share, but as long as you're in the main part of Midtown Manhattan where we were, your streets and your avenues are pretty easily laid out. It's not true north-south, so if you're looking at it on a map, they're diagonal. But if you're using internal navigation, as I do as a person with low vision, northeast is basically north. Southwest is basically south. And so if you think about it, as you go north, the numbers of the streets get larger. As you go west, the numbers of the avenues get smaller. As you go east, the numbers of the avenues get bigger. And so that skill helped us to navigate our way around New York City pretty quickly. And I discovered that was a benefit that I had as a person who had learned to navigate the city before there were GPS systems, before there were cell phones. So back to the Carnegie experience. So we arrived the first night, got our badges and our lanyards, our backstage passes, as it were. And we had a rehearsal that was about a 3.5, 4-hour rehearsal the next afternoon. So we had the morning to kind of relax a little bit. Some of the folks went and did sightseeing. Since I had been to New York several times, lived just outside the city, I've done all the main sites. So I kind of relaxed that morning, and then we went to the rehearsal in the afternoon for about 4 hours. Not at Carnegie. All of the rehearsals ahead of time are done in a different location because Carnegie is a very high demand facility, and they move people in and out of there pretty quickly. Your entrance and your exit are timed and very much regimented, as it were. So all the preliminary rehearsals are done at a separate facility. In our case, it was at a nearby university setting on the Lincoln Center campus, which I actually had the privilege of singing at the main Lincoln Center hall when I was in college. So it was kind of cool to be back at Lincoln Center, although we were in a different part of the campus. But so we had our rehearsals at Lincoln Center. Our choir, our local choir, was told in advance that we had to memorize the music. And everybody in our choir was, frankly, kind of freaking out about that because we've never had to memorize music before. However, guess what? I have. I've always memorized my music. I know how to read music from when I played clarinet, and in my very early childhood I played some piano. So I can read music, although I'm a little bit rusty since I haven't read it for a long time. Most of what I learn musically, I learn by ear. And so in that sense, I had an advantage over the rest of the group because they were having to now learn how to memorize. And I had several people come up to me and ask me, how do you memorize the music? And I've done it for so long, I told him, I said, I just listen in rehearsals, and with some of the music, I do try to rehearse outside or practice outside of the main rehearsals. using practice tracks and audio. Some of the stuff that we do, you can pull up on YouTube and listen to, although it's harder to pick out individual parts. So I try to sit next to people with strong voices that I can follow. That wasn't as easy to do at the Carnegie experience because we had basically assigned seating, and being a person of fairly short stature, I'm about 5'4" on a good day, 5'4.5" on a good day. I was in the front row, and I found myself next to a soprano, which I don't sing soprano. And as we were sitting there waiting for the first rehearsal, I'm thinking, ooh, I hope there's some more basses that come to this front row because I can't sing soprano. And while I had it memorized well enough to follow people, I did not have it memorized to the point that I could do a solo or sing my part surrounded by somebody else singing a different part. So I was very relieved when a couple of basses showed up next to me. However, they were high school kids. So I'm thinking, ooh, I hope these are pretty good singers because they're going to be my music. And I often jokingly say to my fellow choristers when we have a concert locally, I'll look at them when we're on the risers and say, oh, I hope you brought my music today because they're my music, basically. I know most of the pieces well enough to follow along, but not well enough to just, if everybody else stopped singing and the piano stopped playing, to start singing the piece myself. Most of them I don't know that well. Well, about, I don't know, an hour or two into the rehearsal, this kid next to me looks at me and because he had his music, he looks at me and he says, do you have this memorized? And I said, yeah. I said, first of all, we were told we had to. And he said, really? I said, yeah, that's what we were told. It came out later that our director had misunderstood the instructions. But this kid looked at me and he said, how have you memorized this? And of course, I had to share with him that I don't really have a choice as a person with low vision, that I have to memorize it because even if I can read music, I can't read it fast enough and read the words fast enough to keep up while we're singing. As many of you have probably noticed when I've read some Bible passages and so forth, it's a bit slower than what you or other people can read. And so I shared that with him. Well, he was just in awe that I had actually memorized this. And he looks at me and he goes, well, you've been singing a while, haven't you? And I said, yeah. I said, I actually sung at Lincoln Center when I was in college. And he replied, he said, so you've been singing for like, what, 20, 25 years? And I stopped and thought, and it was almost exactly to the day, because it was in March or April when we sung at the Lincoln Center when I graduated from college in 1985. So I said to him, no, I said, it's actually been about 40 years since I was at Lincoln Center. And I said to him, I said, you're young enough, being in high school, you could potentially have the opportunity to sing at Carnegie twice. And he was just in awe of that. And so I share some of that as inspiration to some of you who may be struggling to find your way, struggling to find your path. Maybe you're like myself, a more seasoned professional on planet Earth. Maybe you're a person with a limitation or a disability. Perhaps vision, perhaps some other type of disability. I share all of this as an encouragement that many times things that we are not gifted in can turn out to be a gifting in certain situations. Once again, I hope you're finding value in what I'm sharing here. And if you are, please let me know. Drop a value or a V in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. So as we continue on with our Carnegie experience, So we had two rehearsals. The second day was another 4-hour rehearsal in the morning. And so after 8 hours of rehearsing, we were privileged to have the composer of the piece accompany us on piano. And I actually spoke with him after the rehearsal and shared with him the comment that I made to one of my choristers when he was asking about how I memorize this. He said, now I understand what you go through all the time. And I said to him, I said, yeah. I said, now that I know you can memorize this music, I said, one of these times in a rehearsal, he uses an iPad, not sheet music. I said, I'm going to take your iPad and see if you got the stuff memorized, and maybe I'll try to use your iPad for change. And he looks at me and he goes, well, that won't help you any. I said, sure it will. I said, this is going to be my vision unfolding. Well, the title of the piece that we performed was called A Vision Unfolding. And so it just kind of hit me at the time as a funny little play on words. So I did share that with the composer, and he did find humor in that. I said, I hope that's not sacrilege to take the title of your work and twist it like that. No, he did find humor in that, fortunately. So that's another thing I would share. If you have a limitation, it's important to be able to find humor, to not take yourself too seriously. And that applies to all of us. Those of us who, we all have limitations and we all have shortcomings. But to not take yourself too seriously. I think it helps to put other people at ease around you as well. And so after our 2 days of rehearsals, I did take an opportunity with some friends. Excuse me, I got an itch on my nose for some reason. I did take an opportunity around some friends to go down and visit the 9/11 Museum. That was pretty much the only touristy thing that I did. I had not gone through the museum. I had been to the top of the World Trade Center before it fell 2 or 3 times. And I've been to the meditation pools once or twice now. And this was either my second or third time. I can't remember for sure. But I had never been through the museum. So I did take an opportunity to go through that, although I'd like to do it again a little bit slower. I did ask for, because they wanted to charge $11 for the audio track. But as a person with a disability, those are free. And so I share that with those of you who may have a vision or a hearing impairment. You can inquire at many museums and get the audio track for free. I did that once when I was in Houston at the Space Museum, and it was a completely different experience for me because many of the sites that we saw and the plaques that were read on the audio track, they were read by some of the astronauts that I had grown up listening to on TV and radio. So that was quite a neat experience. And I was also with a friend of mine on that experience who was an astrophysicist. And so going through a space museum with an astrophysicist is quite an experience. But I digress. I share that just as another example of not taking advantage, but I guess it is taking advantage of benefits that are offered to people with disabilities. And when you go to a museum, when you go to a movie, ask for the audio descriptive track. Usually it's a set of headphones. And I'll go into more of the audio descriptive movies, I think, in another podcast. That deserves its own description and explanation. But so after we finished our 2 days of rehearsal and a little bit of sightseeing, we had a third sound check, they called it. Not really a rehearsal. This time in Carnegie. And if you've seen some of my pictures on my Facebook page, it's quite an awe-inspiring experience to see Carnegie from the stage. So we walked in, again, like I say, it was very timed, very regimented. On, you got this much time, and off. So we basically had enough time to run through the piece, and then we touched on a couple of sections, but not really a chance to rehearse. It's got to be pretty ready by then. And then came the concert, and it was a sellout crowd, which was pretty amazing. A friend of mine did some Googling and found that Carnegie holds just under 4,000 people. I don't think it was completely full. It looked like some of the boxes on the second and third tiers, somebody said it didn't look like those were filled. Those may be like season ticket holders, so technically they may have been sold out, but not necessarily in attendance. But it was still a pretty incredible experience to sing to that large of a hall with that many people. And the sound reminded me very much of when the Longmont Chorale went to Europe in 2013, and we sang in some cathedrals and some churches, old churches in Europe that have incredible acoustics. You don't need electronic amplification because the halls are just built for that sound. And Carnegie is much the same. They did share with us that when it was remodeled about 25 or 30 or so years ago, the pianist, Mr. Stern, I forget the first name, whom the auditorium is named after, sat down at the piano and the sound was just not quite right. And so they investigated. He wanted it to sound just like the original Carnegie sounded, which I had the opportunity to attend a concert right before they started the remodel. The sound wasn't quite right, and so it turns out that they had a concrete beam underneath the stage that was impacting the vibration. And so they made them tear out the whole structure and redesign the structure that held the stage so that the acoustics would be just right. And it is acoustically an incredible place to sing. Another reason why I share all of this is it's important for all of us to seize opportunities when they come along. I contemplated not going to Carnegie. It's not an inexpensive opportunity. They do charge for the privilege of singing, about $900. So I seriously contemplated not going. But I've learned over the last several years, as I've had friends and family that have passed away, some fairly recently, I've learned over the years to seize those opportunities when they come along, because none of us is promised tomorrow. And so I would encourage each one of you, when you have opportunities that are incredible experiences, take advantage of those. Don't let the moment pass. And so after the concert, we did have a reception that was a VIP reception open to all VIP ticket holders and the performers at a restaurant. It was an Italian restaurant that was quite good. So we had a chance to chat with the composer, the conductor, we had a poet who wrote some of the poetry that was intertwined with the music. And quite honestly, that made the whole piece come to life for me when she came and performed with our local Longmont Chorale when we performed the piece last October. I guess I didn't share how we got invited. Most of the people had to audition. Our choir was invited by the composer after we had a Zoom rehearsal with him. I guess that was kind of our audition in a sense. And we were invited to participate. He shared with me after the concert when I talked with him that what he liked about our choir, many of the other choirs were high school choirs. Our choir, as a more adult, senior, seasoned choir, had a depth in sound that he wanted along with the youthful sound of the high school choirs. He wanted that mix. The whole piece was about inclusion and equity, and he wanted that element of inclusion, different age groups, different sounds. So that was pretty cool to get that firsthand from the composer. So all in all, this was quite an amazing experience. I did have something else I was going to share, but I think I'll save that for another podcast. The way this is kind of the direction I've taken. I had a pretty good idea where I was going to go with this, but the idea that I got right before this podcast that I mentioned earlier, I think will fit better in another topic that I have planned here coming up. So I'll hold that because I think we've gone on long enough. I don't want to keep you guys too long tonight. But I do hope you've gotten value from this. Let me know. I hope this hasn't been just me babbling on about my cool experience and telling a bedtime story that puts you to sleep. Hopefully you found value. And once again, I sincerely do appreciate all of the support and all of the comments that I've gotten. If you'd like to be added to my email list, I have a couple people. I'm building an email list. I haven't really started sending much out. I don't intend that I'll have a lot to send out, just really notifications of these podcasts so that you can be notified when the next one is coming up. I pretty much do these the same time, Tuesday evenings at 8 o'clock Mountain Time, unless something comes up and I have to shift it a little bit, like I have the last couple of weeks. But if you'd like to be added to that email list, let me know. Either drop me an email in the comment, not your email address, but the word email, and I'll reach out to you and get your email address in a direct message. Or you can just direct message me your email address, and I'll be happy to add you to my list. I do plan to start doing some more smaller group invitation only masterclass type material. I'm still working on that. But that'll be coming up, and that'll be another benefit to having you on my email list. But in the meantime, I think I've taken up enough of your evening or your day if you're watching this on the replay. Once again, let me know if you're watching this live or on the replay. And thank you so much again for your support. I appreciate you joining me tonight. Have a great evening, and until we meet again, either on the next podcast or if I do a short live in the meantime, until then, make it a great day and do something kind, do something good for somebody else. Okay? Until we meet again, good night for now.